Now, 1590 KLIV presents Inside Silicon Valley, a look at the issues and the people affecting Silicon Valley. Now, here's your host, President and CEO of Joint Ventures Silicon Valley, Russell Hancock.
Can Silicon Valley be a great place? That is the question that we're going to explore today. And when I say place, I'm using the term in a technical way. City planners and urban designers talk about the importance of making great places, and they're talking about walkable streets, vibrant streetscapes, commercial and retail districts that integrate housing and jobs in thriving, tech-friendly neighborhoods. They argue that these types of places are in short supply in the Bay Area, and that we need to pursue a deliberate strategy to create them, and we call this placemaking. There are, of course, examples of great places in Silicon Valley, and today we're going to meet the brains and the brawn that were behind two of them. One is downtown Mountain View and the redesigned Castro Street with its stunning Civic Center Plaza. It's a place that's held up by new urbanists as a model of planning. And there were many hands involved in that project, of course, but the city manager at the time was Bruce Liedstrand, and he is one of our guests on the show today. Mr. Liedstrand led the planning team that redesigned Mountain View's Castro Street and the Civic Center. He also planned the Shoreline Regional Park, the amphitheater, and the Shoreline Business Park, which is now home to Google's world headquarters. So, Bruce, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Happy to be here.
Another fabulous example of placemaking is downtown Redwood City. And if you've visited there lately, you've seen that it has had a complete transformation. It was once derided as Deadwood City, but today the downtown is full of inviting restaurants, has a fabulous theater district, a majestic courthouse, plazas with farmers markets, and all of it is walkable and family friendly. The man who is behind that transformation is Dan Zack, Redwood City's downtown development coordinator. He's been a previous guest on the show. We're glad to have you back. Dan, welcome to the studio.
Thanks, Russ. It's good to be back.
So Bruce Liedstrand is a senior figure on the scene. He's considered a real sage in these matters. Dan Zack is an up-and-comer, bursting newly onto the national scene as a result of the work that he led here in Redwood City. So what we have is one figure is a mentor, one is a disciple, and we thought it would be really fun and interesting to have them both in the studio today as we talk about these issues. So thanks very much, gentlemen. Bruce, why don't we lead off with you? How do we do it? How do we create substantially more places like Mountain View and Redwood City's downtowns? How do we do that even while protecting what we have and preserving single-family neighborhoods?
Part of what I think we can do is to learn from what we did in Mountain View and again later in Redwood City. And that was to take time to understand that we wanted something new and different from what we already had. And because our downtown in Mountain View years ago was really in bad shape. We had a 10-story building that sat empty for 10 years, and there was nothing much happening. So we came together as a group, not just the city staff, but city council and the downtown task force. And then we just worked together and we realized we didn't know how to make a good downtown. So we had to learn, and we found a good urban designer, Michael Friedman, and he helped us learn. We visited other cities, and then we realized, okay, this is what we want, and it's very different from what other people understand. And we wrote it into a plan that we called a precise plan. And it didn't just have like zoning regulations. It really had pictures of what we wanted it to be like. And it specified how the community should look. And then we adopted that. Then we had to work our tails off to actually make it a reality, to go get businesses to come in. But today when we see it, I just feel really good. Last night, my wife and I and other family members just went down and had dinner on Castro Street. And it was a real pleasure for me to be able to see how well it has turned out.
It has turned out well. It's one of our favorite places as well. I'm curious, what were the other places that you visited? Who did you emulate?
A couple of things had happened. Before doing this, my wife and I had wandered around both Europe and some places in the United States, small towns, large cities. And we realized, gee, a lot of people are doing it better than we are, but we weren't sure what the tools were. In California here, then we took the city staff and the council and the task force, and we went down as far as I always forget the name, the town down in Southern California, right on the water.
Santa Barbara.
Santa Barbara.
My favorite city.
Yes.
It's magnificent.
And we walked around there and said, wow, this is wonderful. Can we do this?
Yeah.
And that was one of the best inspirations for us.
Dan Zack, tell us the backstory on Redwood City and its transformation.
Well, in Redwood City, there had been a long desire to get the downtown going. Up until the 1950s, 1960s, it was a really vibrant place. And a lot of people still had those memories of it being the place where you could go shopping, JCPenney's, Woolworths, Montgomery Ward's, and see a film at the Fox Theater, and it was the place to go. As the freeways were built and malls were built in Hillsdale and near Stanford, and it drew some of that retail energy away, and the place declined, there was always that desire for it to regain its prominence as a place. And so work was done starting in the 90s, but really in earnest after the turn of the millennium to make it happen. And so there was a strategy of, first of all, creating an anchor tenant, if you will, or a couple of anchor tenants around entertainment to really kickstart the process, bring people down, get people reacquainted with the place, and invigorate it economically. The project was undertaken by the city's redevelopment agency to assemble a site that could be the home of a city parking garage, and then where we could partner with a developer to build a cinema, and the cinema would be the Kickstarter. At the same time, we worked with San Mateo County to get bring the former county courthouse back to life. It was the crown jewel of the city at one point. Redwood City is the county seat for San Mateo County, but the Beaux-Arts courthouse had been buried underneath an annex in the 1930s by the WPA, and you wouldn't even know that this jewel was there. And so the annex was removed in 2005. The entire front of the courthouse was reconstructed, and then in the place that the annex had been, Courthouse Square was created to serve as kind of the civic heart of Redwood City, the city's outdoor living room, and also as a second entertainment venue. And so the city then began an aggressive program of live performances and events in the square to also serve as an additional draw, and those two things together really started pulling people into the downtown area. And then to capitalize on that momentum, we completely reformed all of the downtown zoning and design guideline regulations to facilitate market-based private development that could come in on the heels of these anchor tenants that we stimulated, and facilitate housing and office development that's all done by the private sector. This was also done in the form of a precise plan in the mold of Mountain View, in a large part because of Bruce's involvement as our community development director at the time. And so that has been in place since 2011, the Downtown Precise Plan, and it has facilitated thus far 1,172 units of housing. Just in the 2 years since it's been adopted. The existing housing downtown is 805 units. And so in 2 years, we've stimulated the creation of more housing than has been ever created in downtown Redwood City, at least in the last 50 years or so. And so that strategy of generating excitement and economic activity with entertainment, and then capitalizing on that with code reform has really paid off in a big, big way.
You're listening to Dan Zack. He's Redwood City's Downtown Development Coordinator. He's joined by Bruce Liedstrand, former city manager for the city of Mountain View. Bruce, Mountain View did it. It has spread to Redwood City now as a result of the success that is so apparent to all of us. Palo Alto has a vibrant downtown scene. How do we spread this to other cities throughout the Bay Area? What's that going to take?
I think it takes a fresh approach in the individual cities that are interested in this. And that's just my personal perspective based on my experience. But in Mountain View, we had to change some things and try to create a vision for what we wanted. And that came out of community process of learning together and creating a vision. A similar pattern in Redwood City. People got excited about what their downtown in Redwood City could become and created, Courthouse Square when people started talking about, wow, if we remove that old annex, wouldn't it be wonderful? And once people get excited about something positive like that, then they usually find the way, including the financial resources, to make it happen. But that's more than just passing a zoning law and saying, okay, now we want to go downtown. It's the community getting involved and wanting it.
When we go to downtown Mountain View, everybody loves it. It's really beyond debate. Everybody agrees this is fabulous. But at the time, I have to believe there were opponents and major obstacles that had to be overcome. Would you speak to that?
Whenever you do major change, there are going to be opponents. We ran a process to bring people in the community into it to help create the vision. And so that minimized it. It didn't mean, though, that there weren't any. And when, for instance, we got to the point of having to tear up Castro Street and rebuild it, people came out of the woodwork. But basically, if it is a community-based vision that the people in the town really want it themselves, then there is enough political momentum to keep it going, and it makes it much easier for council members. It's one thing if you're a council member and you believe in this and you got to vote on something, but everybody in the audience is saying, that's terrible, don't do it. Whereas in Mountain View and Redwood City, when issues came up before the city council, the community was out and said, no, we support these things. And that makes it a lot easier to make those decisions.
Castro Street is anchored by the Civic Center. So the monumental City Hall complex and the Center for the Performing Arts. Now, was there controversy surrounding their scale and scope?
Whenever you do a major project, again, there will be somewhat controversial. But in Mountain View, we actually were not trying to do a new civic center. We started off remodeling the old one and then realized that it was structurally unsafe and had to put a stop to it and say, oh, we got to start over and build a new one. And when we did that, we had an architectural competition in which we had 5 different architectural firms submit plans or concepts rather, and then we made them publicly available and let the public comment on what they wanted. It wasn't just a public vote, but we put it on display as part of the Art and Wine Festival one summer and had them out and had people had forums so people could comment on what they want. That helped make the community feel the ownership of it, and that sort of thing I think makes it much easier to accomplish a major task.
Dan Zack, what were the lessons that we learned from Redwood City's process?
Well, there's a couple of lessons that I could take away from the whole thing. One is to go to the community first. In local government, a lot of folks who try to undertake big change go about it in the manner where the leaders and the experts will get together and come up with a plan, and then it's a sales job. We're going to sell this to the public and show them the wisdom of what we've come up with on their behalf. And sometimes that works, but a lot of times there will be backlash, even if the plan is pretty darn good, because people feel like it's being pushed on them and they weren't involved in the creation of it. And so in Redwood City, whether it was for the precise plan or the design of Courthouse Square or any of these other projects, we went to the community first. Before we had put pen to paper and started crafting a plan, we went to the public first. Even with our parking plan downtown, all of these things, we went to the public first. What is working? What is not? What would you like to see? What are your hopes and dreams and fears? fed that into our thought process, came up with alternatives. What do you think of these? And worked with the public. And so by the end, the people that had been involved in the process really felt like they were heard. And they could see their fingerprints on it. And frankly, the end product was better because we learned from these folks who use the city every day and know the ins and outs of it. And so that process was very powerful to me and had a big impact on the public acceptance of what we were doing. We've done things in Redwood City that in some communities people would be afraid to try it. They would think it's not doable, and they might be right, but they might be wrong. It might be doable if you go about it the right way. Another thing that I learned from our experience in Redwood City is that we made a big effort to help people understand that, you know, our goal is not to mess with what is working and what is loved, and primarily single family neighborhoods. And they're fine and they work well and people like them. And the goal was not to shake them up. The goal really there is to preserve and, you know, enhance when necessary. And helping people understand that we're really focusing our energy on downtown and other major transportation corridors like El Camino Real, and fixing the things that need improvement, directing growth to the areas that can handle it, like downtown and El Camino where it's appropriate. And by doing that, it relieves growth pressure from the neighborhoods. You know, if you don't have an area where you're channeling growth to, people are going to keep pushing to build big things everywhere, even where they might not make sense. And so we're directing that pressure to downtown and El Camino, making it easy there, and that relieves pressure from the neighborhoods. And then finally, helping people understand that not only is downtown and El Camino the right place for it to go, but when you do it in these places, the rules are different than the single-family neighborhoods. And so whereas in other parts of town, it might be all about the car, pedestrians are secondary, downtown, it's all about the pedestrian, and cars are secondary. In other parts of town, you know, you spread things out and make it green and spacious. Downtown, you pack things in. Elsewhere, you separate things out. Downtown, you mix it all together. And helping people understand in this 5% of the city, all the rules that you're used to go out the window, and it's a whole different set of rules. And if you want your downtown to be a great place, you know, you need to recognize that. So go to the people first, help them understand we're not after their neighborhoods, and then help them understand that everything is different downtown, and you need to play by a different set of rules if it's going to be great. And by doing those three things, that was a big part of our success.
What about the critics who were concerned about runaway spending?
In Redwood City, you know, that didn't come up a whole lot. There was the bulk of the public improvements, streetscape improvements, public parking garage, courthouse square, was done through our redevelopment agency. And so the whole idea behind redevelopment is that you take an area that needs economic help, you take out bonds to improve the area, you pay back those bonds with the increased property tax value that comes following the improvements, right? And so that really wasn't a big issue. And then a lot of the things that have come subsequent to that are all privately financed. We crafted our code to be able to be responsive to market conditions, and so that all the new housing and office that came following our big investments in the middle of last decade could be privately undertaken, because we realized we weren't going to be able to financially contribute to every property and every project. And so because of that, we've been able to get a lot of good stuff to happen, and it's being done by the market, and we're purely playing a regulatory role and helping to shape it to meet what the community expects. We have typical budget issues like every community in this, recession era that we've been through for the last couple of years. But in terms of the public improvements and the investment in downtown, there hasn't been a big issue there, partially because of the role of redevelopment and that mechanism being appropriate, and people really liking what they're getting too. There's a lot of love for what's been created downtown Redwood City, and so if people love it and they feel like it's theirs, that they're much more likely to complain about the cost of it.
Bruce Liedstrand, were redevelopment dollars used for Castro's makeover?
Yes. Part of downtown Mountain View is in a redevelopment district, so that was a portion of the funding. Another portion of the funding is that Mountain View was financially very conservative in those days. And with our general fund, we took 20% of the revenue each year and put it in a savings account and lived on the other 80%. And so we built up this savings account for investments in various big projects in Mountain View. So that was another portion of it. And then there was probably some other financing tools, but I don't recall the detail. But it was partially financed by the redevelopment.
Great. We need to take a break. We're talking today with Dan Zack and with Bruce Liedstrand. We're talking about urban design and development issues. We're going to continue this conversation, but right after these commercial messages. Welcome back. You're listening to Inside Silicon Valley. I'm your host, Russell Hancock. Our guests today are Redwood City's Downtown Development Coordinator, Dan Zack, also the former city manager from Mountain View, Bruce Liedstrand. We're talking to both of these gentlemen about urban design, about planning issues, and how we can have fabulous places dotting the Silicon Valley landscape. So we've talked about your main streets, your respective main streets, Castro Street and the Redwood City downtown. Now I want to talk about a road that actually connects them both, and that would be El Camino Real. El Camino is, in a sense, our entire region's main street. It's the ribbon that threads through all of the peninsula cities. It's a historic road, of course. In fact, it was California's first road. It used to link up all of the missions. Today, it's a road that is kind of an odd collection of things. I call it a crazy quilt, a hodgepodge of artifacts from previous decades that no longer seem to work for us. So the question that I have is whether El Camino can be transformed to look like Castro Street or downtown Redwood City. Bruce Liedstrand, what are the possibilities?
I think the possibilities for El Camino are fantastic. I think this is the big opportunity for us here in the peninsula if we think about it the right way and work together to make it good. El Camino, as you mentioned, was, this was the Royal Road. It connected the towns. The two connections were the old rail line, which is now the Caltrain commuter rail line, and then a short distance away, El Camino. And just as the rail line is one of our important connections and transportation corridor, El Camino is another one. And so we need to make sure that public transportation is really effective on it so that you could live anywhere on El Camino and you don't need a car because you could get over there and there's real effective transportation. And then as we get that, we need to begin to think of that as the peninsula's main street, like we thought of Castro Street as Mountain View's main street, and redesign it not exactly like Castro Street, but with a lot of those same characteristics, because right now it's just dominated by cars. You can't even cross the street. In fact, I think sometimes if we're going to have meetings about how to make El Camino better, we ought to hold the meeting right out there in the corner at El Camino and feel it, because otherwise we think about these things theoretically. First of all, we're going to have to tame the car, and there are ways of doing that, and there is the Grand Boulevard Initiative that has been working on this, but I think that we are not thinking bold enough. We need to think about making it a really good place for people. Cars are important, but it should be primarily a place for people, even if you're not in a car, and I think we can do that.
So let's talk to Dan Zack. Let's talk to our listeners about the people that are in their cars, and if we're going to be displacing them from the road altogether. Many people would object to that idea. Mm-hmm. So what do we do about that?
Well, and that's just not realistic. It's a state highway. and Caltrans isn't going to allow the cars to be displaced. And it's one of the only links all the way through the peninsula. We need that automobile link all the way through the peninsula. The key thing is not to displace the cars so much as to help that corridor serve more than just one purpose. Right now, it's just geared toward one thing. We need it to do multiple things. We need it to move those cars. We need it to move people on transit that don't want to take a car but still need to travel that path. And we need it to be a great place to live and work. And right now, it's really only doing one of those things, and we need it to do all of them. So that's really the key. It's all about balance. It's not about displacement. We need the auto link, and that's never going to go away. But streets can be all of those things. You can look at a place like even in San Francisco, northern Van Ness Avenue is Highway 101, and yet it does a lot better job of being a place to walk and live, as well as move cars. It moves 50,000 cars a day on that road, right? And yet you can cross legally and safely every 200-300 feet. There's a lot of housing and businesses there that do really well. So that's a possibility. Even better than Van Ness, which has its issues, is something like, say, the Champs-Élysées in Paris. Massive street, moves massive numbers of cars, and yet some of the most expensive real estate in Paris, which is one of the most loved cities in the world, right? And it moves a lot of cars, but it also moves massive numbers of pedestrians, has some of the most expensive shopping on earth, and some of the most expensive real estate on earth. It's a great place to be. And so streets can do all of these things. And those are we need to look at models like that and learn how we can adapt El Camino Real to serve purposes. More than one purpose. We have challenges here. We have the state of California that we have to work with. They own and operate the road, and so the individual communities along the road cannot just do whatever they prefer. They have to work in partnership with Caltrans. So that is one of the biggest challenges, in addition to working with each other as the communities, because more than 20 communities line that road. But it can be done. It can serve more than one purpose.
Bruce Liedstrand, if you told people in the Bay Area that El Camino could be one of the world's great roads, like Champs-Élysées, they would be thrilled. So why isn't it happening? What's stopping us?
I think it is part of our decision-making process and how we see these issues, how we work together or don't work together in order to accomplish things. Silicon Valley is a place of new ideas. It's a place of innovation, creativity. We try things. On the governmental sector, however, we're not comfortable with that. I have worked primarily in the public sector over the years, but I think we need to be able to loosen things up a little bit, to be able to see and be more open to fresh approaches.
It's true. If you're a public official, you're not open to risk. You feel that you must be cautious and inclusive, and of course you're always worried about the lawsuit, and you're always worried about the next election. So how can we introduce risk-taking into the public sector?
I think we need to think about it as risk management rather than risk-taking, because in the private sector, somebody can, and they often do, take major risks. They sometimes, in effect, quote, bet the company, as they say. That's not appropriate at all, I think, in the public sector. The public sector has to have a different perspective. But it doesn't mean that you don't take and you don't manage some risks. What I believe in is that if you are open about what you are doing, when you take something to the city council, I would tell them in open communication, look, here's what we think should be done. We think that we can't guarantee 100% success. We think this is the best thing. These other couple of things could occur. If they do occur, we'll come back to you. Here's what we can do about it. But we're doing this openly with trust, so that then if this other one of the bad things does happen, we can just go back and say, as we noted, this could risk, this one did occur, and here's how we're going to fix it now. But it isn't like we're pretending there isn't anything risky in anything we do. It is getting it all out in the open and acting in a trustable manner.
Dan Zack, you said that the road, El Camino, is fulfilling one function, and that would be throughput, but it's missing the target on other functions. So how do we do this? Give us a practical how-to guide.
Well, there are two aspects to it. One is the use of the land along the road and the design of the buildings on that land. And then the second part is the roadway itself and the design and function of that roadway. So in terms of the use of the land along the road, the cities control that, okay, through their zoning ordinances and other plans. And so you have to tackle that part of the equation at the local level. And we have done that in Redwood City. We've actually rezoned El Camino Real from end to end, from the Atherton line all the way to the San Carlos line. And all of it now requires new development to come up to the sidewalk and to have active frontages along the back of the sidewalk, meaning storefronts, porches, lots of windows and doors coming and going. And that helps create a comfortable pedestrian environment. People don't like to walk in a void, and so when you put the parking lot up against the street, it immediately creates a hostile pedestrian environment. When you bring the building up to the street, up to the sidewalk, and you line it not with blank walls but with windows and doors and people coming and going, now you've gone a long way toward making that a place that's comfortable to walk. And it's not a far out concept. Not only does this work in all of our downtowns, but even the mall, has a central quote unquote street with the storefronts of the shops right up to that walkway. And you never want to have your walkway separated by vast distances from your destinations where you want people to walk to. So in your zoning and other codes like precise plans, you can do that. Require those new buildings to come up to the back of the street and to have active, interesting frontages along those streets. You tuck parking behind and underneath, and use other mechanisms to make sure that everything moving forward, it helps us toward our goal of making El Camino a nicer place. We've put in place controls so that when we have residential neighborhoods really close to El Camino Real, that this new boulevard-style development tapers down gracefully toward the residential development. A, because that's good planning. B, because that helps the public get behind the concept. We don't want to put really tall buildings right up next to the American Dream single-family home. So we want to put the taller heights toward El Camino Real, 3, 4, 5 stories, whatever makes sense in the particular context, and then step it down so that the lowest portion of these developments is adjacent to the single-family homes, and you have a really graceful transition there. So that's what you can do along the roadway itself. And then within the roadway, that needs to be the cities working in conjunction with Caltrans. And there what you need to do is create a street that can serve these multiple purposes. Right now, in some places you have no sidewalks, in other places you have sidewalks 3, 4 feet wide, sometimes with big, telephone poles right in the middle of them, sometimes with no lighting, sometimes with very sparse lighting on 25-foot tall Cobra head, highway style lamps. Oftentimes you have high-speed traffic right along the sidewalk with no buffer of any sort. These are very hostile conditions, and even if you get the buildings right through your zoning and precise plans and other codes, that's still a nasty place for a pedestrian to be, and people with choice aren't voluntarily going to spend much time there. So you need to get that right. So part of it is widening sidewalks, getting at least 8, 10, 12-foot sidewalks, or even more that can provide a comfortable place to be. Putting buffers between the main walkway and the cars. On-street parking is really, really important. On-street parking serves a couple of purposes. One, if you have retail along this street, it makes it really vital resource for the retail itself. People like to park right in front and go in. They say that every curbside parking space is worth about $200,000 in sales for the retail businesses in the area. So on-street parking is important economically, but also it's a physical barrier between pedestrians and that massive amount of automobile traffic on El Camino Real. And it helps make that sidewalk a safe, pleasant place to be. One of my daughter's preschool teachers a couple of years ago was run down by a car that went out of control while walking her dog through her neighborhood. There was no on-street parking there to buffer her, and she was in the sidewalk but got run down. And it's a real threat and a psychological threat. People don't feel comfortable being 5 feet away from 40-mile-an-hour traffic. Street trees along the curb line, not between the building and the sidewalk, but in that area between the pedestrians and the automobile are really important. They provide shade, they provide greenery in the appropriate way, and they make the place a lot more pleasant to be. They give people a break from the sun and just make it more attractive. And then pedestrian scale lighting. We don't need these 25-foot tall freeway type of lamps. We need 12, 14-foot tall pedestrian scale lights that are maybe 60 feet apart instead of 200 feet apart, and that are focused on lighting up that sidewalk as opposed to focus on lighting up the the roadway. So these are the kinds of things we need to look at in terms of fixing up the roadway itself. That's going to have to be done with the cities in partnership with Caltrans. Funding has to be identified to be able to do that. It takes money, but if you get those two things right, the buildings and the road together, you've got a great place.
How is it possible to get all of the cities to go in on this together? What you've described is a major transformation, but it won't be effective or impactful if one city does it, but its neighbors don't. So how do we take a regional approach to these kinds of development issues?
Well, one thing I would suggest is that early adopters will definitely see benefits. And while it would be best if the whole corridor was improved, and ultimately it very well may be, I have confidence that it will over time. Individual pockets being brought up to better design, standard will provide benefits, and people will enjoy those places. The property values will go up there, and they will be successful. And I'm a big believer in the fact that if you can be successful in one area, that's the best thing you can do to spread that idea. And as you have pockets of success, people are going to feel more comfortable with taking the leap themselves. Nobody wants to be the first guy out of the gate, but once you have a few pockets here and there that are working really well, then others will follow. I mean, right now, for example, the idea of revitalizing downtowns and making them pedestrian friendly is pretty ubiquitous and well accepted. But I remember when I first got into the planning profession 20 years ago, it was not. And I was beating that drum, and a lot of people looked at me like I was crazy. And now that so many towns have done it, and there are so many examples of it working and being loved, pretty much everybody's on board with trying to get their downtown going. And so I think this could work the same way.
Bruce Liedstrand, Dan is describing a city-by-city approach to improvements on this road. But is there a way to do it with all of the cities working together through some kind of a joint partnership, maybe a joint powers authority? Would you ever recommend that kind of an approach?
I think it is worth exploring what the cities can do together. On the other hand, I think we should recognize that as you get all of the cities trying to agree on the same thing, sometimes the idea gets watered down. And so pretty soon you're not creating the great place. You're creating like whatever we say of something created by committee. Yeah, it wasn't great, but we had to do that to have somebody else happy over here and something else over there. I think it is important to start out with, if it were really great, what would it be? And get that in our heads, a picture in your mind. Wow, this is really a grand boulevard, and I'd love to live there. It's that good. And I want to go over there for dinner, and then say, okay, what is this thing? Then we've got a lot of hurdles to go through. Caltrans, how you move enough traffic, and those issues, I think, can be solvable. But if you have this clear idea in your head about what we're excited about doing, that helps a lot. What drove things in Mountain View in the old days was that people were excited about, wow, our town could be great, and this is what it's going to be, and we built it. I'd love to see more of that same kind of energy happening on El Camino Real. And then, as Dan says, let's do the pieces that can happen, and as people see, wow, that's nice, then I think it's easier for another community to say, well, we were skeptical, but that is working out, and our people like that too.
Should our region try to take over the road? The technical term is relinquishment. Should we have it devolve from the state so it's no longer a state highway and it would become a regional asset instead? Dan Zack.
I think that's something that should be looked at. I don't know if that's the ultimate solution or not, or if it's even doable, depending on how Caltrans views that road as part of their highway network. They might not be up for it. But Bruce, well, he was city manager of Cathedral City, and he could talk about this, but he was part of a relinquishment of a state highway that was converted into a boulevard through that city down by Palm Springs, and so it can be done. But I think it needs to happen either way. And so if Caltrans decides they want to hold on to it, it's an important part of their regional highway network, and they don't want to let it go, I don't think that should stop us in our efforts. However, if they were to relinquish it, it certainly opens up a lot of opportunities, because now the communities that would own the individual pieces of it through their jurisdictions would have total control over the design of it. In Redwood City, we have rezoned the entire length of it and started doing private development along the roadway, but we haven't got as far as that with the improvements to the roadway itself. But we did do one block from Broadway to Brewster. We gave it the full treatment. Widened the sidewalks, triple row of Chinese elm trees, pedestrian scale lighting, the whole 9 yards in it, and it came out really nicely. However, we had to work with Caltrans for quite some time before we could break ground to get their approval on all the things we wanted to do. And the design that came out of that process was really good, and we're really proud of it, and it works. But we felt it could have been even better if we had complete control, because we had to make a few compromises that we would rather not have in order to get their approval, because they had their goals that weren't quite 100% in alignment with ours. And so they were helpful, and they worked with us. But you have to, when they own it, you have to, cede that control to them. And so if they relinquished it, cities could do whatever they deemed, to be the right thing without having to check with a higher authority.
Bruce Liedstrand, was Palm City a model, do you think, for El Camino?
I just think on the relinquishment issue, we should again go back to what is our vision for what this is, and then flesh it out into concepts. Part of this then is what happens on the roadway itself that we need to deal with Caltrans on. We need to then go through negotiations with Caltrans, but it's easier and better, I think, is if we really know what we want, instead of just planning for, well, this is all that Caltrans would ever approve, so no sense getting our ideas any higher than that. But then when we see what we can negotiate with them, then we can see, is that good enough, or do we want to do the major step of getting relinquishment? And it may be that you get relinquishment for take the whole system out of Caltrans, or it may be segments come out. When I was down in the Palm Springs area, and we took Cathedral City's a segment out for their downtown, it was only one segment, and we had to negotiate that. We actually had to go and get special legislation through the state legislature to allow to be taken. But it was important for the community, and we did it. We also then negotiated with Caltrans and said, if we take this out, you're going to be saving money in the future. Give us a chunk of that money so we can have it so we take over maintenance. So there's a lot of things that can happen, but part of it is just getting a dream of what we want, and then just persistently going and finding solutions to get it done.
Bruce Liedstrand is our guest. He's joined by Dan Zack. We're talking about El Camino Real and other urban planning and design issues. We're going to continue this conversation, but right after these promotional messages. Welcome back. Russell Hancock here, your host. You're listening to Inside Silicon Valley. You found us on 1590 KLIV. We're talking with Bruce Liedstrand and with Dan Zack. Both of these gentlemen are urban planners. They're responsible for the fabulous design work that we see in places like Redwood City or Mountain View's downtown Castro Street section. Bruce Liedstrand, I want you to tell us if there are things holding us back today in our public decision-making process that prevents us from having fabulous streetscapes throughout the Bay Area.
I think there are. I have been here in the Bay Area largely since the early 70s, and I can see how much industry has changed over this period of time. We have amazing innovation, creativity here in private industry. On the other hand, and I've worked mostly in the public sector decision-making, we are in public sector still relatively traditional in our approaches to it. And I think we could improve things by learning from the private sector. I think it would be wonderful if we could somehow get some conversation going between the public and private sectors about, are there ways that we can learn from the innovation and creativity? Are there ways that we can sort of do team decision-making together where we don't have just the public sector on one side and the private sector on another, but we come together and talk about problems together? Take sort of, like there's problems about we don't really have enough homes for employees close to jobs. And not just look at that, that's a public sector problem or a private, but just talk together. What is this? Are there things that we could work on together to do it? And how can we help the public sector be a little bit more innovative in how they do it, how we manage risk, how we make decisions, but be more open to change? And the public sector often, what happens is there's a major issue and it gets handled by a department head in one of the cities, and there's coordination and everything, but there's never really, or at least rarely, any team decision-making where you really blend a variety of perspectives together. And I found that kind of team approach can be very productive, particularly if we can cross the lines and involve public and private sectors. And I'd like to see us have a conversation about, isn't that possible here in the Bay Area? It's one of the best areas in the whole world, and I think we ought to be able to address our problems more effectively.
Dan Zack, what's been your experience bringing the private sector into Redwood City's decision-making process?
Well, when we put together our downtown precise plan, one of our goals, in addition to just creating a really delightful place, was to stimulate a lot of private investment. And so we talked with developers. Early on, there was a housing symposium with housing developers talking about what kinds of things do they need in order to be successful. What are they looking for when they're shopping around for a place to buy land and construct a project? As we were constructing the plan, we brought in an economist to look at land values in Redwood City, construction costs, what rents were at the time and projected to be in the future, to figure out what kind of things we needed to have in our code in order for them to be able to build a project and be profitable and want to come back and invest again. And so that dialogue was there from the beginning. And now, at the stage that we're at now, where we have momentum, we have a code in place, we have development underway, I get calls regularly from developers, meet with them before they've even drawn up their plans, help them understand what we're looking for, help them understand the process. And that collaborative nature really helps them have confidence that they'll be treated fairly, and helps them understand what will be allowed and what won't be. And they really like that certainty and that collaboration. And so we've been able to have really productive relationships by working hand in hand like that. And we don't let them off of the hook. They have to follow the rules, but we're clear about what we want, and we're fair about how we administer those rules, and it's working out really well.
We're completely out of time. Bruce Liedstrand, we're going to give you the final word. Are you hopeful? Are you optimistic about the Bay Area's efforts to attack its challenging, its planning issues and have a landscape that's more like the European ones that you enjoy so much?
I am cautiously optimistic. I think we need to do more things. We need to aim higher, dream better, work better together, crossing traditional lines and just collaborating. But I think we can do it, we should do it, and I think we will.
Dan Zack, Bruce Liedstrand, thank you both for being our guests on Inside Silicon Valley.
Thank you.
We hope you'll both come back. There's much more here that we should be talking about. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Inside Silicon Valley comes to you every week. Be sure and join us again next week for another exciting edition right here on 1590 KLIV.